afternoon, everyone. I did see some of you last session, so I was running. Yes, that's true. Okay, so we're here today. I'm Dr. Lindsay Meeker. We're here to talk with you about high-impact considerations for multilingual learners, including children who are dual identified. And by that, we mean, right, they could be identified as a child with a disability and be a multilingual learner. And actually, depending on where their strengths and areas of potential growth fall, they might be what we would call triple identified, right? They might be also needing challenge and supported with talented and gifted services. And I'll pass it over to Tammy to introduce herself. This is just a little bit about me. My email is here. My Instagram is here. My favorite work in the world right now is with multilingual learners. We're doing a research project and being able to work with Tammy in this capacity of thinking about how do we bring evidence-based practices to life for multilingual learners and their families across the early care and education setting.
And so here's a little bit about me. If you have your phone and you're on LinkedIn, you can scan that QR code and connect to me on LinkedIn if you're on that platform. So I work for Early Childhood Professional Learning, or ECPL, and so we are the folks that put this conference on behalf of the ISBE. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you stop by our table at the end of this. We have lots and lots of things to give away that we don't want to haul back to Arlington Heights, so please grab a tape measure, a Band-Aid thing, and everything else that's sitting on that table. That would be awesome. And so I do a bunch of different things at ECPL, but primarily what I do falls under the umbrella of English as a second language and or bilingual initiatives. And so everything we do at our office has to do with Preschool for All and Preschool for All expansion, and then my area of expertise is in ESL and bilingual stuff.
And that's where Tammy and I first actually met, was within, we both have also spent time in K through 12 bilingual and ESL education, and then decided that preschool actually owns our hearts. But what is unique about that is we really have seen that continuum from multiple perspectives, understanding what do we need to do with language now so that it transitions into the space of kindergarten, first, second grade on up. So this is just an if you want to, it's just giving you a new way for your brain to think about how you can take notes. You can use the back of the sheet that I handed out to you if you'd like. I like sketchnoting because it lets me write what I want to take away from a session, and I don't need to think about what's important to somebody else. So what we've done throughout here is you might see little tiny versions of this. Those are spots where we were like, this is something we'd probably want to take notes on, but maybe that's not what speaks to you, maybe that's not what's part of your strategic plan, maybe it's a different slide. But what I encourage you is, if it doesn't bring you joy, let it go, right? That whole theory. Make sure that you're writing down what really will impact you, so that when you get back to your desk or your classroom or wherever you might be working, that's the stuff that stands out, because everything we're going to say today might not be it. And then place that intentionally so you can think about what are my next steps.
And so part of what we wanted to bring it to you today and share with you today, and apologies if you already heard me talk about this in my other session, so bear with me for just like a minute as I share. Some of what we're going to be sharing with you today comes from the English Learner Identification Project report and the work that we did in that space, which Lindsay and I were working on in 2024 across the state of Illinois. And what this was an equity initiative funded with federal funds through the Preschool Development Grant, Birth Through to 5. And it was an equity initiative from the state where we were focusing on identifying preschool-aged English learners in community-based organizations who normally don't have to identify our English learners and don't have to serve them. It's not part of the compliance checklist for those programs. And so there are a number of different things we focused on in that project and in the report itself, which looks like that. And if you ever need something to read at night or at other times of day when you, I don't know, it's like a 30-page report. It's actually pretty cool, but it's also, depends if it's at your sort of thing. But the report itself focuses on 3 different areas. So there's information about data collection processes and practices, English learner identification policies and procedures, some recommendations that we're making at the state level, but you might be able, as Lindsay was saying, some of that may make sense for you in your own strategic plan. And then what does this mean from workforce training needs and workforce implications back in your program? So as we go through today, I'll highlight different things that are relevant in the context of the strategies we're sharing today.
And I think what's cool to mention about this plan is that if you're like, I don't have time to read 30 pages right now, the nice thing is that there is like a space in the front of each kind of topic area that like gives you the Cliff Notes version.
I know, we're going to show our age, but yeah.
All right. It gives you the AI spit out version, but it's like steps that you can take and what gaps that might be addressing. So then you kind of know, oh, would I benefit from this section, or maybe actually I'm good with this part, but I need this part. So just knowing that it's broken up that way.
So the first part of the project, or first part of the report as well, kind of talks about equitable identification. How do we identify our kids? So we know in Preschool for All and Preschool for All expansion programs. Here we go, let's do this real quick. You know what it is it's not tight. Okay, we can even take it down for you too. What we found is when we went out and worked with these 29 programs across the state is we had different programs that said, yes, we want to participate in this project, but we don't think we have any multilingual learners in our program at all, but can we still participate? Yes, because if you've never given a home language survey, if you've never looked, you don't know what you're going to find, right? Every single one of our programs, all 29 community-based organizations found multilingual kids. Even those programs who were like, we don't have anybody. We know we don't have any. Oh, we do. So if you haven't asked, now is the time to do so. So it begins with using, we recommend the ISB Home Language Survey, the Illinois State Board of Education Home Language Survey for every single child in your center. No matter what, you give them the home language survey, have English on one side, their other language on the back, and give it as an actual sheet of paper. Because that's the other thing we heard back from our organizations, is that they got more and better data by actually handing out paper than having it be just another data field on the reg form online. And here you go, you can kind of see how it broke out. We actually worked with folks across the entire state of Illinois. Every single one had multilingual learners. Not only that, so you can see Region A, which was Chicago and the Burbs, so Cook, DuPage, and Lake counties. We had 16 sites that we worked with up there. 100% had multilingual learners, and 75% of those sites actually had enough students to qualify under the normal guidelines to have staff. So if they had been in public school districts, they would have been required to have had staff that were trained. In other parts of the state, so like northern Illinois, you're talking Kane, McHenry, Will County, all the way west to the river, to the Quad Cities. We worked with 5 different sites in that area. 60% of those sites qualified, would have qualified for staff, or needed, met the criteria, I guess is how we put it, for EL bilingual credentialed staff. You can go from there. Central Illinois, 5 sites, 20% met the criteria. And then downstate Illinois, which was Metro East, which is this side of the river from St. Louis, and kind of like that area, 75% of those sites qualified.
And remember, right now our funding structure isn't set up to support that.
Right.
And so we just want to think about, as districts and administrators, how are we pulling in our early care and education providers? If we're in the community-based side, how are we connecting to, so that we can figure this out and be advocates for one another, right? Because what this tells us is that a very high percentage of community care and education centers are trying to do the work with nothing.
Yep.
No additional supports, no extra layer.
But we need to prove our kids are there, right? And we have. So we have some new resources that we were able to pull together through this report, or through this project, I should say. And the ones, I would say, the thing that we're probably most proud of are the videos. Mr. Wiggins, who's behind the camera right now, actually helped. He actually made these videos for us, and they are awesome. They're absolutely awesome. There are a total of 6 videos, 2 chunks of content, right? So one is about home language surveys, and using the home language survey. The other is about the gift of raising your children bilingually. So the image you see here is the young children in the bilingual brain in English. So each video is available in English, Arabic, and Spanish, which are the top 3 languages in the state of Illinois right now. These are translated with narrators speaking in those languages. In addition to that, you can pull it up on YouTube, like in English, and choose a different language via closed captioning. Let me just tell you though, I can't vouch for whether those are good or bad. I mean, that's done by the YouTube, gremlins that, operate YouTube or whatever. I don't know the quality of those translations. We can vouch for the ones where we have the narrators actually speaking.
And we actually sought parents that were native speakers of that language. So, because the goal is, right, that these videos authentically connect to families and feel like something that they can ingest. But happens to turn out they're really good for staff too. But the target audience was families. And so we actually went and we talked to parents that have multilingual learners as children, and they were actually the actors in our films.
Yep. So some are 6 minutes, some are 4 minutes. They're well worth the time, and we strongly encourage you to watch them with your families. Every time a new family comes in, hit the button, let them watch it in their language or in English, and then have them fill out the forms. So, is this one yours? I think so.
Yes, it's just
Going on its own? Okay.
all right.
Please
So
hold
you
it
might
tight.
be thinking about, well, we of course want to use native language, but what does that look like across that birth to age 8, settings, especially birth to 5? And how do we do that in settings where maybe we're not funded for a bilingual program? Maybe we have 15 languages and we're not sure how to approach that home language component. So I just wanted us to think about, there's a Latino Policy Forum project happening right now that's looking at the birth to 3 side of this. It dovetails nicely into the work that Tammy and her team already executed, and I was lucky enough to get to work on that with them a little bit. How do we start with birth to ages 2 to 3 when we actually know it also starts prenatal, right? But how do we go from nurturing the child and sparking the bilingual brain to thinking about how do we continue to build on that bilingual brain for instruction, for biliteracy? And that will depend on the makeup of your program, what that looks like. It might mean a dual language preschool classroom. It might mean translanguaging. It might mean that we're doing a lot of family education about making sure that families know we can teach English here, talk, read to your kids in your home language, right? It depends on what your demographic makeup is. But what we know is that all the way across, we need to be using home language to communicate with our families so they have equitable access, because language is power. As we move through today's workshop, we will be looking at what are those high impact strategies for multilingual learners, and what are the considerations that you might need to think about as you're working with children who are dual identified. So we have to look a little closer, right? You see that magnifying glass? Okay, here's what we're doing for UDL, and then how do we look a little closer? We know that multilingual learners benefit from having comprehensive input, low stress output, and a responsive environment. This will come up again. We'll talk about it deeper. And remembering that language development includes the home languages to the greatest extent possible. That's part of this whole process. So when we think about comprehensible input, you're like, there's a lot of pictures going on there. That's right, because in preschool, comprehensible input means it's multisensory, that I get to engage in a lot of different ways. Music and talking and observing and building and playing. Dialogue with the teacher. And then low stress output. Here's the thing, low stress doesn't look the same for every child. We have to know the child in front of us. We do know that play tends to be mostly low stress when we have taught children the expectations of play and when we have taught them how to use the materials. We also know that one-on-one fairly low stress as long as it's developmentally informed. We also know that small group can feel very low stress as long as we're working within that child's zone of proximal development. Whole group, we need to take a good look and say, how do we help whole group instruction feel accessible for multilingual learners so that they're part of the conversation? Because it's really easy in whole group as the teacher to say, you know what, I gave them small group opportunities, so I'm just going to try to call on the ones who I know will be able to access this so that we can keep going. It's also really easy for multilingual learners to hide in that context. Maybe if I just do somersaults instead, I actually won't have to answer this question. Right? We also know that for some children, that when that affective filter is really high, that's when we might see tears on the carpet. You're like, what? I thought this was a good book. What's happening? So we need to think about how we make that accessible, and that's where that responsive environments comes in. And while I commend anybody who has labels on toys or shelves or anything in multiple languages, great and. What are the toys reflective of your environment? Are the texts reflective of your demographics? Can kids reach all the materials? Have you taught each center so that it was accessible? Have you modeled? All of those things. When a child walks in the room, does it feel calm? Or maybe not so much, right? So lots of different things to think about there. Wonder is sometimes not brought up as like a pillar of early childhood instruction, but it's the unspoken that we all know can just bring so much inquiry, so much play, so much language. And sometimes we don't harness it enough because it also leaves room for challenging behaviors and like I might get off my schedule and what happens if I can't get to snack on time? Well, here's the reality. Nothing will happen and it will be fine. And you can also just put snack out so that they can eat it whenever they want. But it's scary for us sometimes. We want kids to wonder, but not quite that much. And so we're going to try to get you today to think about how do I open that up, because wonder is one of the most powerful tools in your classroom. We also know that children that are experiencing wonder will do hard things because they want to get the answer. So I might not feel totally comfortable with my English skills, but if I really want to know what dinosaurs eat for breakfast, I'm going to ask that question, right? Because I really want to know it. But we have to set the classroom up so that kids do want to ask those questions, so that kids do wonder. We have to give provocations. You might see right here, this is Play-Doh, and it's some building materials. There's like a screw and a washer, a tile. That is from the buildings unit in creative curriculum. But what we did was just laid out a whole bunch of building parts and the Play-Doh. And we were like, go for it. But we gave them some language frames. Can you hand me blank? Do you think I could? What are you doing with that? So we gave them the language frames and we said, go. It was magical because they had just read a book about an architect, but it was, child-friendly book. Then they're in these play centers together with the Play-Doh and the building materials. And by the nature of feeling engaged, affective filter was lowering. Right? I felt easier to use my language. You see the wonder wall? You can't read all the words on there, but that was what developed after their play. So they did that provocation, and then we said, okay, everybody come up with your own questions. What kind of questions do you have? We had to model questions with myself and the para educator. Some of them said questions that had nothing to do with buildings. That's all right. We put it in what I called later question box. You do have to go back to it. That's the thing. But they came up with all of those questions, and I wrote them and they dictated. Because I had a Spanish bilingual paraeducator, I could have the kids translanguage during that opportunity. So if they were sitting with a Spanish bilingual friend, they were asking their questions in Spanish. Other kids were asking them in English, and then I could put them up on the wall in both languages. I didn't translate and only put it up in English. I put them up in both languages. So I'd like you to take a minute, and I'd like you to wonder about what you're seeing. Turn quickly to a partner, and here's your sentence frame. I'm wondering, blank. Okay, go. One statement each. I'm wondering what?
Yeah.
Which they're in the right of the lane. Right.
Okay, so you guys just did some wonderings. That would be the last step of this process. Okay? So when we start working with children on wonderings, that allows us to leap into a see, think aloud, and wonder. So I used to just say see, think, wonder, right? You're going to make your observation, you're going to think about it, then you're going to ask a question. But I was missing a really important part. I was missing that think aloud, where kids actually work through the dialogue in their head about what they want to ask. And so then I had to teach kids to think about, how do you talk about your thinking? And so we came up with some sentence frames. I think blank, how about you? So I would have said, I think that the letter shadows are the coolest. How about you? I observed, my eyes are telling me blank, and my ears are telling me blank. This reminds me of, that's where that think aloud comes in. Student to student. You can also do it in small groups and have everybody share their think aloud. And then they get to that development of the questions. When I do the question development, we usually do it as a shared writing, or I'm writing, they're dictating, depending on the age and stage, right? By kindergarten, usually it's a shared write. Sometimes second semester preschool, because some of them could do it, some of them already. So the provocation piece is this that you just experienced. This was your provocation of what made you wonder. It had to spark your interest enough to make you want to ask questions. So right now what I'd like you to do is I want you to think about what are some provocations that might go with the curriculum that you use or that your teachers are using. Because believe it or not, sometimes what teachers tell me is the hardest is the provocations. What do I put out there for kids that makes them want to talk, that makes them want to ask questions, and teachers are like, that provocation piece is so hard. So think for a minute, what could you use as a provocation that goes with a particular topic? You have 10 seconds of think time. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to come up with a couple more. Maybe 3 total. Okay, now Tammy and I are gonna model something, so come on over to me. So if we're thinking of provocations, but we're not gonna say, I guess we could say, because we probably don't have the same topic. So I'll say the topic is oceans. What's a provocation that you could give?
You had to think about a preschool version. Where does the water hit the beach? Why does that change during the day?
Yeah, so you could show a video of the tide coming in and out, and you could be asking, why does that change? What's happening? I would say, I'm gonna bring in a bucket of seashells. And then you're just gonna go back and forth, okay? What topic did you come up with and what was your provocation? So you're gonna do a rally conversation, back and forth dialogue, but when you're talking, you only give one statement at a time, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Okay? So turn to a partner and rally your conversations, rally dialogue. What are the topics and what are the provocations that you came up with?
Language is so rich every time we talk to trees. And we talk about
Okay, I heard lots of good ideas. I heard something about going outside and thinking about habitats. I heard someone talking about taking a neighborhood walk. I heard someone talking about bringing in unique items from their own home. All amazing. So if you're an administrator in your center or instructional coach, something that you can do to help teachers feel ready for this is to have provocations ready that match your units or topics, because that feels like that lift is gone, so I can focus my cognitive lift on how I'm doing UDL. How am I executing the strategy? And then eventually though, you want them to start taking that from their students. So don't give them too much, right? Give them a few to get started with. What are their first couple units in the year or the first couple months? And then you're gonna say, how do we flip that? What are the interests in your classroom right now? It doesn't always have to align with the curriculum. Maybe we're taking a week break and we're doing some project-based learning. So just thinking about moving from here's something you can use. Feel free to add your own. Okay, now how are we bringing in child interest? That gradual release of responsibility for the teacher is also important, just like it is for children in front of us, right? It's important for all of us. Even if I'm an administrator, what's the gradual release of responsibility of moving from we've never implemented a behavior intervention program to now we are, right? How do we give people that cognitive lift? Contextualization for multilingual learners is absolutely essential. Also, you'll see up there, if you just take a look at the kiddos' eyes, they're looking at that, again with shadows, so apparently that's just super cool and everybody loves it. But if you look up there, you see this, right? Those eyes widen. As soon as those eyes widen, that's your opportunity to say, what are you thinking about? What are you noticing right now? And so it's really important for teachers to notice what are those nonverbals, especially for multilingual learners, where they're giving you visual cues that they might be in the space to talk about it, right? And those raised eyes, excited faces, that means, hey, this is probably a good time to tap into that. But contextualization means, what are we tying it to? Yes, we're probably going to practice phonemic awareness and phonics in skill-based isolation, but then what are we tying it to? Are we going to practice it with a text? Are we going to practice it in play? Are we going to go practice it outside? How are we giving everything they're doing context? Because what we know about multilingual learners is they're trying to build background language about everything in their world at the same time as they're trying to build literacy skills. And if we do that separately, we lose a lot of ground. So how do we contextualize things? Right here, they were doing the tree study in creative curriculum. So they were out there measuring trees, tree rubbings, all those kinds of things. And we're going to start to walk you through what does language experience approach look like. And I'm going to give Tammy a second to talk about why Santiago's dinosaurs, why that text, and what does it lean into as far as a child's curiosity.
Do any of you know this book? Anybody? Okay, I love this book. So it's right here. Actually, if you hit, so that happens to be the author. I found a picture of her online when she was going to a library to do a real loud book. Could you hit the next one for me? There we go. So here's a couple pages from the book itself. This is just a cool book for, I think, any classroom, honestly, but it's unique in, at least I haven't seen another book written quite like this. So Santiago is a new student. He's in first grade. It says that Santiago peeks inside Mrs. Taylor's first grade classroom. He hears the excited chattering of his new classmates, but he can't understand them. Quiero irme a casa, a mi casa, he mumbles with teary eyes. I want to go home. And so then here's a picture from later on in the book. But what's happening is he's brand new to school, he doesn't speak English, and he feels like there's no way he can communicate with his classmates. And so it reminds us, I think this could be a really good book to read with your class right before you have a new student come in. Also to talk about social emotional learning, what is it like when you go into a new situation, whatever that new situation might be. But what's really cool is this. This is a page from towards the end of the book where it says, by the end of the day, Santiago's eyes sparkle. As he waits for his mom, he shares his dinosaur book with Anya and Cam. The children roar and giggle as they turn the pages. Santiago's dinosaur-sized problem now resembles a stegosaurus. And although it's not extinct yet, Santiago knows that one day it will be. So this book actually goes through and compares the sizes of his problems to the sizes of different dinosaurs. So I mean, you know, like, who doesn't love dinosaurs, right? But it's a really cool way, I think, to kind of contextualize feelings, too, for kids, as well as bringing in how those of us who are bilingual, we use different languages, even within the same utterance. And it's not a problem. It's just what we do because we can. So I think it's a really good book for that, but also there's just other elements of it that we can pull out, too. And what was the other thing you wanted me to say? Is there something else?
No, that's basically it. I just want us to highlight, like, the books that we choose matter. Right? And when we're doing language experience approach, which is what you're going to hear about in a minute and then try a little bit of in the context of the room that we have. But language experience approach, we often want to start it with a really engaging text or provocation then text or text then provocation. And then we move through a language development process. But this book also does some of those social emotional learning pieces, like on the side. It's like a guide on the side for social emotional learning.
Yeah.
So one thing we could do is we could they read the book, they're talking about it, they're having their collaborative conversations, and then we could do a process art. We could do dino prints. We might, okay, you see that paint there and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have at least 3 teachers to tell me I'm not doing this if I have to get out paint. I say this because they say to me, you want them to use paint with cookie cutters? I'm not ready for that. I'm always ready for that, but I have to understand there's this continuum of readiness, right? For mess. My mess readiness is really high. But you could also use Play-Doh. You could also use, can you hold up the kinetic sand? Kinetic sand. All of those things, they could make these dino prints. But let's think a minute. What kind of oracy building prompts could you add? So let me give you an example of what I mean. So back here, these were oracy building prompts that we gave you, like sentence frames, sentence stems. Now let's think about if we read the book already, okay, we've talked about Santiago's dinosaurs, the kids talk to each other about it because when kids talk more than the teacher, language grows. And now they're in this space where they're going to make dino prints. On giant craft paper, they have the colorful paint available, they have their cookie cutters. What kind of oracy building prompts could be added? Okay, think about that in your head for a minute. This print looks like it could be. I know this is a small dinosaur because, okay, you're thinking about how do you use those like technical vocabulary in a really fun way. Another fun one with this is when you can cut out like Google pictures of different dinosaurs, and they can build what they think a dinosaur habitat would look like, and they glue their characters in the habitat, right? Process art idea that I did with light and sound. We looked at the shadows, right? But then we had black paper, and they had white paint, and they had different materials like a paper towel tube and Legos, and they practiced printing with the white paint on the dark paper. So we were talking about light and dark that went with our shadows. And then it was a whole different set of sentence frames. Sometimes your sentence frames will be task-oriented, and sometimes they will be content-oriented. So if you're going to have kids doing process art on a regular basis, which means, by the way, it's not that 12 mittens look like all the same. That's not process art, that's something different. That's following directions. But when you think about process art, it's where the kid gets to engage in the materials, right? And they're thinking of describing words because you're going to have them stop and process what they're making. Hence, process art, right? So with the table, with the paper towel tubes and the black and white paint, we might have said something like, I was trying to make blank, but it ended up looking like blank. Because we can also teach them resiliency in that moment. Because when we talk with resilience, we tend to feel it a little bit more. And that's part of why it's so important to give kids words for different times of their day and for different emotions. We use one with the Block Center all the time. Because our multilingual learners, once they feel frustrated with the language, then everything else feels really hard. But if we can give them the frames, dinosaur prints are not hard for multilingual learners. It's how they're talking about their dinosaur print. Discovery Center could be shadow drawing with dinosaurs. Has anybody done this? Where you take it outside and they do the shadow drawing on the sidewalk. Super cool. In a minute, you'll get to do some play. Hopefully you try that out. Because Tammy has some materials here for you.
Cool stuff. We got a flashlight in here. This also has some cool little provocation cards in it as well. Like, try this, try that. There's some different things and mirrors. We have this with dinosaurs.
Okay.
Got try with dinosaurs.
Also, what we know is when children are outside, some children tend to feel more comfortable. You might hear language development emerge in new ways when they're able to do it outside.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
So when you're talking about provocations, coming up with provocations, you're talking more about provoking language and discourse around the activity, or things to get, or provocations to get them to engage with the activity?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
So when you're thinking about your provocation, that was a really good question. You're thinking first, what's going to stimulate wonder? What's going to engage interest? Then you're thinking about, and how do I layer the language into that interest? How do I capture the wonder to build the language? And then you're putting in your sentence frames, and you're thinking, okay, what sentence frames can I use that will help grow the complexity of language? Sometimes we think about sentence frames as like, I'm using it to make discussion easier. But the reality is, yes, and. You might be using very basic sentence frames when you have like a newcomer. But as you notice, my sentence frames had different levels of complexity. Because as children grow in language development, we want to continue to add complexity to the language frames, because that will help them develop more complex, more technical language, more like sentence structures that are not all the same. And so it's a both and. You want them to be engaged with wonder so that they feel like they want to engage with the book, so that they feel like they want to engage with the conversation. Does that make sense?
So to build on that too, so it's not like, I think sometimes what we do in this field of ESL and bilingual is we have to spend our time undoing our assumptions about language learning. And by that I mean, we're not trying to teach high school Spanish to the kids, right? Like we're not teaching in that methodology of like, today we're gonna learn all about fruits and all the names of all the different fruits. No, like what is the thing the kid loves and give them language to go along with that. Just like we do in early childhood all the time anyway, we're applying those same principles, but we're doing it here. So a child like Santiago is gonna be probably engaging in more and longer utterances around dinosaurs than he might around, I don't know, something else that might not intrigue him as much. And he may mix in some Spanish in there, but he's more willing to be experimental with English, for example, if it's on a topic he absolutely loves, because he's got those ideas, he wants to get them out when he's interested in the topic, right? Rather than like that high school, I'm picking on high school Spanish, but like that kind of idea.
Yeah, we're not trying to teach it in like you're not trying to, you don't have time to teach language like you would teach high school Spanish anyway.
Right, yeah.
Because they need to be learning all the skills at the same time. And it's just not as authentic.
It's not gonna stick.
You want them to feel an interest that will drive the language. You have a question?
I did. So, I'm just curious what you would do. We had a friend who came this year and she didn't have, she still is not communicating in English to us. She's been in our program all year. She has started doing really well with classroom routines, and everything we send home, we do, English, Russian. We have QR codes around the classroom to support like transitions, which is mom's voice in Russian, telling her where we're going or what we're doing.
Which is also an amazing
That's a
idea.
cool
That's
idea.
the thing.
Ooh, I like that, yeah.
I mean, a really awesome social worker and multilingual teacher who did that. But how do you? I'm just curious. Like, what are your thoughts about drawing her out?
So the first thing I want to say is that's normal.
That's normal.
That's a normal stage that children go through. It's the what you would call either the silent period or now a lot of people call it the observation phase. So first, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that, right? That's a normal stage, and it can take 6 months to 2 years for children to move through that. You can tell that she's making progress because she's understanding more, and the more consistency you have in the schedule, the more consistency you have in other ways you communicate with her, the faster that will go. But you got to give her the chance to do it in her time. But if you want to add to that.
No, it was part of that. And then also thinking about the context in which you're making the conversations feel safe, right? So,
she's not going to talk whole group. She's going to talk one to one.
She feels very safe. She sings Old MacDonald in the middle of circle. Like she just starts belting it out.
and that is repetitive, right?
It is repetitive.
It is
it's
repetitive.
What she knows. Like when we sing a song,
Yeah.
she goes to Old MacDonald without fail every single time.
That's awesome.
It's
So
precious.
good. And when she has to do something new with new language, that probably feels harder.
Yes.
The good news is if she's comfortable in whole group, that means pretty soon that language is going to emerge and it's going to feel really good. But I have had students where we literally start with, I sit next to them and play with them individually, and I'm like thinking aloud my play. And then pretty soon I'm saying, oh, would you like to whisper that in my ear? Tell me
Like
all
you
about it.
you say all that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, like I might be sitting there, if I'm doing shadow drawings with the child, I'm going to plop down on the ground right next to the child and I'm like, I think I might lay the dinosaur this way so that I can make sure I get all the spikes in my drawing. Oh, I like that you chose the dinosaur with the long tail. And I'll say, why did you choose that dinosaur? Even if they don't respond, I'm going to keep thinking aloud like it's a dialogue. But I'm going to pause and give wait time for them to respond when I do ask questions. And then pretty soon I might say, can you tell it to me in my ear? Now let's get a little further apart. Can you talk to me at the small table? So because when it's new language or new things, that's gonna feel a lot different than like singing Old MacDonald, right? Because that's repetitive and she knows it. And so some kids feel more comfortable with that one-on-one. Some kids are gonna feel more comfortable in play centers, and they may not ever talk to the adults for the entire year. So that's okay though, because I can capture language development, I can capture my DRDP skills by listening to them play. I don't need the child to talk to me to know if they can use the language. I have to be ready to capture it in their space of learning. And so that's kind of the other thing to remember. Okay? It's just different, like, what's lowering that effective filter?
Because I almost wonder, would it be happening someplace else during the day? Because that still counts. Dramatic play between two children. They're out at recess, or out on the playground. They may be conversing. She may be speaking then, and it just may not happen. I mean, you also have to take into consideration different cultures and how children communicate with adults as well, right? So it may not be something, I don't know if it's true for this particular child, but for other children, right? Depending on what situation you're in. It just might not be the way that she first communicates. It might be happening first with a couple of kids in class, and almost certainly around whatever topic she loves. Whether it's dinosaurs or, you know, whatever.
I wanted to ask, we use Pocket Talks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but so it's real-time translation, and there's tons of languages on there. But I guess, so my main understanding, I get a lot of families that ask this, they want to then speak English at home, which I try to, and maybe I'm wrong, you can correct me, but I try to encourage them to continue speaking in the home language because we don't want them to lose.
100%.
Yes, and I think that families feel the pressure to then speak English because they feel like their child is then falling behind. But I guess kind of, and you guys are giving a lot of great ideas, but just encouraging, we want them to use that English, but some students that are really comfortable and they'll just start belting out to us in Russian. Are we kind of just conversing back and forth like that? Are we encouraging the English in that scenario, or are we just like?
They're going to translanguage because that helps them make meaning.
Mm-hmm.
If you have people in the room that speak the child's language, including other children, like, do that.
Okay.
But if you don't,
Yeah.
then I would continue in like looking for a lot of nonverbal cues.
Okay.
But 100%, you are encouraging families to speak their home language or their preferred language that they speak with each other at home
Okay.
as much as possible.
Okay.
Because families, we know what happens when they don't, right? They lose their language because we can do English at school.
Yeah.
It's all fine and good.
Yeah.
The battle in this country is not to learn English. The battle in this country is to not lose who you are and lose your home language.
Right.
That's why we did both sets of videos, right? So there's the how to do the home language, but then there's also helping parents understand and edifying parents and understanding that bilingualism is a good thing, even when the pressures of the world get to you. Sometimes it's even other family members in your extended family saying, I remember translating for a family where the other extended family were saying, you should be doing more in English with your kids. But those children were doing better in math and science and everything else because mom was speaking to them in their native language at home in all those other areas. They will learn English. If you stay in this country, you're going to learn English. All of the research, 40 years worth of research tells us that, right? But you might lose your home language, and we need more bilingual doctors and lawyers.
Yes.
And the only way they're going to be bilingual, truly bilingual, is if they keep that native language, right? Because even though I learned high school in Spanish, it's not the same as if I would have, spoke it from childhood.
Yes.
So yes, please keep, and they have to hear from somebody other than just us ESL bilingual teachers, that they
We
should
talk
keep it.
a family into having one person in the household not stop speaking Spanish.
Yeah, whatever the language
I'm like,
is. Yeah.
please, one of you,
Yes.
because they were trying to learn English too.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to learn desperately, and I said, if one of you, and I translated it on the whatever, and we were going back and forth. One person in the household, please continue to speak Spanish so your child does not lose this talent because it is invaluable.
Yeah.
Well, and let's just fast forward, what are we talking about, 4 or 5-year-olds? Let's fast forward 9 years, right? Sure, no problem. So let's fast forward a handful of years, right? When we've got to talk about things like sex, drugs, alcohol, gangs. What language are those really tough conversations going to happen in, right? I mean, remember our background is originally K-12. Those are going to happen in your native language. If I picked you all up right now and shipped you off to, I don't know, pick a country, right? You're not gonna stop speaking your native language, whatever that is with your kids, just because you're in pick a country, right? You're gonna continue that language, and you know that when your kids are 10, 12, 14 years old, you're gonna need your native language to have those really tough conversations, to pass on your beliefs, your ethics, everything you know about the world, everything you know about your culture is gonna happen through that language. But sometimes the stress is so intense at these younger ages, and it's also on the parents of like, if I just knew more English, I could make $1 more an hour, or whatever, right? We lose sight of what's gonna happen. We all know it, but when you take a step back and go, but wait, you know? You need to share this language with your kids. You need to be able to have those tough conversations in a language you are comfortable with as an adult, because they're gonna be uncomfortable anyway.
That's a
Right?
great argument. Yes,
This is
it's a
beautiful.
great argument.
It really
I've
is.
had the conversation more than once with families.
I can tell, but I mean, sometimes when you just don't know what, you know, they are just like, just do it, I really know.
Kick into
And you're
parent
like, no,
mode.
doubt. Who are
If
you?
it's not good for, my last name is King. If it's not good for a King kid, it's not good for your kid, right? So like if it was me and pick a country, that's what I would be doing. So same thing here, right? But also, by the way, they're not gonna believe me as much as they're gonna believe you as a monolingual, if you're a monolingual English teacher. They're gonna believe you a lot more than they believe me as the bilingual teacher, even though I'm speaking to them in Spanish.
And that's the thing I've tried to convince them, I'm like, please, like my husband's Hispanic and my daughter is mixed, and I said, like, please don't lose that language, like, be proud of it, you know, but there's like this underlying stigma, they want to speak English, and then the students are losing it by like first grade and they're full English, and it's just unfortunate to see, so.
So one last like off the topic thing here. The studies show that despite what you may hear, this is pedagogical, not political, hang with me, okay? Despite what you may hear out in the world, we know that today's generation of kids loses their language faster than any other previous generation, period. On my mom's side of the family, I'm Italian. On the other side of the family, I'm Polish, and a whole lot of other stuff is in the mix. My grandpa only spoke Italian until he started going to first grade in the city of Chicago, and then he started learning English. He only spoke Italian up until that point, right? And he continued to speak Italian with his parents like all the way through. My mom learned some, she could understand some Italian, but never really learned how to speak it. I know nothing. 3 generations, that's generally how it works, right? Aside from the fact that it ticks my mom off, I speak Spanish, but anyway. That's a different story for a different day. Anyway, other thing, right? Nowadays, we have children who can no longer communicate with their parents, like legit. 10 years old, they can no longer have a conversation with their parents about anything other than like the most basic thing. That's terrifying from a societal perspective, because you have now lost access to your heritage, to everything, you know?
I
So,
think that's a
well,
stronger
yeah,
argument. Even the
Use
couch
them all.
conversation thing,
use
yeah,
all of them.
like that,
Yeah,
I think that would pull at someone's
it's
heart.
heartstrings.
Yeah.
Also, when you start to have bilingual parent committee meetings, like advisory committee meetings or whatever, when parents can talk to each other, and the parents who have older kids, and they can talk about how they've lost touch with their kids. And then their kids go and they find that familial sense from somebody else, right? From some peer group that may or may not be the best peer group, right? You want the bilingual doctors and lawyers and everybody else, right? Like, bring them back. Gotta keep those conversations going, right?
Isn't there also a lot of research around how being bilingual and biliterate actually strengthens brain development?
So you gotta watch the videos. It's all in there. Like it even talks about how if you go into later life, like I don't know why. Like now I'm starting to think things in Spanish, but like la tercera edad, like the third age, right? Like the old, like what do you call? Oh my gosh, what do you call it in English? Like older generation, right? If you go into that already as a bilingual person, and then you develop things like Alzheimer's or dementia, and you start to learn language. If you go in with 2 and you start to lose 1, you still have 1. You know? I mean, just basic math, right? Like you end up, it's good for you. I mean, no, seriously though, legit. There really is studies that show that like you do better in the later stages of life if you're bilingual. You have more cognitive flexibility, all of those sorts of things. You tend to hang on to more language in your later years, even if you develop things. And you may not even develop dementia and Alzheimer's because you are multilingual. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of good things. Even if we start now, all sorts of good things about being multilingual, not to mention the fact you just talk to more people, you know, and understand more things as a result, right? You make more friends. Okay, cool.
More employment opportunities as you get older?
It's not about they're going to learn the English if they stay here, right? But if you keep the native language, you have more employment opportunities because now you're a bilingual pick your field, right? You know, whatever it is. Yeah, absolutely. It really truly isn't about the English. Really what we're doing is we're trying to create literate human beings who are nice to other people. You know? Sorry,
That's true. We need literal human beings, and we need them to be nice.
And they will become literate through their first language easier than through their other languages. English is a really hard language to become literate in, as you well know, right? We break more rules than we follow when it comes to phonics and phonemic awareness.
And it's also, it's a scaffold and support. So that's sometimes what people forget. It is that we're using it because we want them to keep their home language, but it also helps them negotiate meaning.
Yep.
So like when you hear translanguaging, that's why. So let's walk back through real quick. Language experience approach means usually I'm going to read something or show something that prompts interest. I'm going to have that conversation. We're going to stop and let kids turn to each other and talk during the text. Not to me, because if they're talking to each other, I have at minimum 50% engagement. If they're active listening, 100%. So they're going to be talking to each other about the text. You're giving them questions. They're building up that background knowledge. This could be any text. It could be a nonfiction text, whatever it might be that attaches to that unit of study. Then we're going to have them do something. That piece is the experience, right? So the language and literacy was, I'm reading about it, I'm talking about it. Then I'm doing something. That's the language experience approach. Maybe I'm going outside and we're going to go on a nature walk. Maybe I'm doing process art. Maybe we are taking a bunch of cardboard boxes and we're building a neighborhood in our classroom. But that's the experience part. And we're giving them language so that during that experience, they're talking, right? They're talking, they're making meaning. This is just another example of the what could they be doing. Then I'm thinking ahead, what types of different skills could be assessed during language experience approach? What am I going to do in that language experience approach that I can assess? And I don't mean like pull you to the table and be like, okay, we just read Santiago's Dinosaur, retell me the story. That's like not what I mean at all. I mean, as they're doing their experience, I'm coming up and I'm saying, tell me about what you're making. Tell me about what you're building. What are you feeling right now? What do you want to do next? And then I'm looking at those LLD measures on my DRDP and I'm checking it off. I'm making my notes. I'm writing my anecdotals. Okay? What kind of visual cues and routines can you put in place for yourself to help you assess throughout the process? This is huge. We were doing a language experience approach during the fire safety week, okay? And in the dramatic play area, they had like firefighter costumes, and they had like a paper fire like extinguisher, and they could do all the things. In Block Center, they were supposed to be building structures that were like not going to burn up. So that was their goal, and they had to tell us about what would make it so these structures wouldn't burn. And then they were reading books about firefighters, and we were watching videos where they showed the tour of the firehouse, right? So this whole week, they're engaging in this project-based learning about firefighters. And we picked that because during the community helpers, they couldn't get enough, right? They couldn't get enough of firefighters and fire jumpers, and they were like really excited about this. By the way, it's California, so that might give you a little bit of context. And but I knew to dive into that project-based learning with that teacher into the firefighting piece because kids were so engaged. And then we thought, what can we do to help them engage? And then we did a process art where they had yellow paint and red paint and different materials like, the bubble wrap that comes, like say if they had that, they had the big thick brushes. And so they were creating different kinds of fire scenes without people, just the flame. So anyway, but I had to think about what visual cues are in place for myself and the teacher so that we don't lose track of that. So sometimes you might see up in the center like What skills are we practicing? You might even see the DRDP numbers. That is not for the child, right? It's on an anchor chart for me to say, okay, I'm in this center right now. We're looking for dialogue. I'm in this center right now. We're looking for their ability to follow multi-step directions. That is a signal for me. That is a signal for the paraprofessional. That is a signal for the speech pathologist. That is a signal for the OT. So that whoever's coming in that room to push in at the moment, they know, like, you might see other things because we're following kids learning. We're looking for learning when it's happening. But they do know what is the intended outcome here and what could I potentially be assessing. So now I want to think about play, language experience. What do you notice? What do you wonder? We just walked through a play, language experience approach. You have this document right here. You're just going to take note right now. You're going to think about a study that you have coming up, and you're going to just make some notes on this, and we're actually going to get some toys out so that the next thing you do is you're going to actually play, because that's important. So you have like 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, 5 minutes. And you're going to work through this language experience approach on a study that you know is coming up in your building. And you have the listening, speaking, reading, writing 4 box in front of you. And then there's something for social, emotional, and bilingual learning. So you get to it, 5 minutes, talk with a partner, and we're going to get some things out. But I do like the looking, like, how many bears do you see and how many bears are actually there, right? That's a really good scientific concept, but it's also like a good observation skill.
And we haven't even started using the little color things right there too. I wonder
Right.
what would happen if we used those with the flashlight.
So, what about the Mirasol? What did you think you could assess over there?
Well, I wrote down several things, the matching, sequencing, emotion names, action words, counting, I mean, there was all.
So many, right?
Yes.
In a couple minutes. Like, if the kids were playing with those, that could be a quick, like, I'm stopping, I'm going to play with you for a little bit, I'm going to document, take a few pictures, and then go to the next group, right? What about okay, like, the big crowd was back there. So, and it was amazing, right? What skills did you think you could have looked at back there with the shadows and the dinosaurs and the Play-Doh?
Fine motor.
Fine motor for sure. Somebody said, if I put an object in front of it like the bear, how many bears do they see? In the mirrors, because there are mirrors back there. We talked about up here, right? And I'm going to have Tammy hold it so I don't drop something.
Yep.
But these are like loose parts play, right? But what if we were studying, well, let's use a word from one of our studies. So let's use tree. We're doing the tree study. Tree. And why is that different than anything else? Because it's a new material. I can be practicing the same protocol but with a new material.
And it seems like a new activity.
And it seems new, but it's not. Anything else that you thought, wow, I would have never thought of that. Or, my teacher's already doing this. And I just need to help them understand how to document it. That might have come up for you. So in each one of these, you'll have access to the slide deck for each.
Yes, these are all in the
Yes.
in the folder.
So for each strategy, we've given you what are the special education considerations. For language experience approach in particular, one of the big ones was, are there times when you might need to provide a variety of tools so the activities are accessible? If you have grasping needs, but each one of these has these considerations for you so you can go back and check them out. What discussion structures and scaffolds will be in place to ensure access to language practice? So when we were doing that back and forth volley conversation, that was intentional so that everybody got a chance. You might be thinking about what else do you need for your supports for interaction? If you're going to have kids interacting with each other, how are you scaffolding and supporting that? What does that look like? Flipgrid's on there because maybe you have them talking into that and you're going to assess it, right? Maybe they're presenting what they made with their dinosaur prints. Engagement supports. Maybe you're actually having them become the tree in the forest, right? Realia, sensory exploration. All of these things generate new kinds of languages. Sensory exploration is one of the biggest bang for your buck for describing words. These are other things to consider. And we've talked about them all today, but room arrangement, all those kinds of things. Because why? Because we need input to be comprehensible. We need the output to be low stress. Stress-free or low stress, right? Because that's how we become responsive, as we think about the kids in front of us. These are areas of play that you often see all the time, but now in your head think about what kind of language comes from those. What kind of frames can you add? What kind of content pieces can you put in the space? I love this one up in the corner. They were studying weather, and they had just got done studying farms. They had built a farm here. They had their little chicken coop that they built, and then they were putting on a show about the different kinds of weather. And what was I assessing? Beginning, middle, end. Technical vocabulary. You might need to think about, okay, if you are doing projects, can everybody access it? What do the tools look like? Here's that mirror effect again. How do I create wonder? But if everything's on the floor, what am I doing to make sure if a child needs something at a chair height? Do I have both? I just put this here because it's always good to remember play is a tool. And when we think about language development, it is the strongest tool you have in your toolbox. We can have kids develop play plans. But see this language progression. Tammy, what do you notice about that language progression?
Looks to me like it gets a little bit longer as you move from left to right.
It does. And for those of you who have looked at the kindergarten can-do statements, it is aligned. So when you look here, by the time they get here, 2 to 3 sentences with technical vocabulary, that means my language is similar to that of a native English-speaking peer, but cooler because I'm probably bilingual. So you see where it adds. If you pull the can-do descriptors up for kindergarten, because that's where we're going, right? You can see how these align, and you can also see what kind of scaffolds you can add. So if my activity is that they need to retell a story, but they're in that beginning stage of language development, how am I using pictures, right? Can they explain their own picture and their own goal? That's what you're wondering. If they're not quite yet to the place where they can explain, we're not asking them to write it themselves, we're asking them to dictate, right? So what's the skill and how do you scaffold it?
And just a quick note, you don't go from the left side to the right side in like a month.
No.
Or 6 months.
Or maybe a year.
Or maybe even, yeah. But if you have sentence frames and you have really interesting things, you're going to see children move up in certain areas, at certain different points in time, right? So, but don't expect them to go from the left, like you wouldn't expect that from anyone, right? Any child in any language, they're not going to race across this. That's not the goal. The goal is not English, it's to put language to what they're experiencing.
Because it's a gradual release of responsibility,
yeah.
Right? And kids are going to fall in different places, but what we do need to know is if that's where they're at, what do we do to make sure they can access the experience, the content, the learning?
Yep.
We've already talked about these today, but we put them there for you. They're language starters. And this is an example of a play plan that's done in a bilingual classroom. Generally, and what you can't see here is that those are actually 2 different colors. The English is in green, and the Spanish is in blue.
Oh, I didn't realize it. Cool.
You just don't see it because
Maybe
I'm
I missed it.
No, you didn't.
Okay.
It's just a black and white photo, but the big deal is that every child had a way to access that, right? Because I had some native English speakers, some native Spanish speakers, but when it comes to play, we want them to be able to access that from any language access point. You can see this little card here. It says add a fence. There's also ones that say add a window, add because it's helping them develop the language that goes with the, you know, the technical vocabulary. So you'll see these on each one. What do? We do not have time to walk through this today, but you will have, like, look up the dictato and how you do it in preschool. Kathy Escamilla is in her book Literacy Squared, and all I did was give you some tips, but it's essentially how you say things, they say things, then they start to write and draw, so it's very cool. TPR means I move my body so that it matches the story or the word. And then I gave you some for that. If you have children that have some challenging behaviors that may come up or unexpected behaviors, space is a big one here. Because it's very easy for them to run into each other, and so just kind of watching for that. We did collaborative discussion already. This is another way to do that. Talking chips means I use a tool, and I can only talk when it's my turn to put the tool in the middle, and I use loose parts. You can use Cheerios, you can use bingo chips, whatever you want, but it allocates like some power structure, equity. We know songs, chants, and rhymes. In fact, that came up already. Taking a look at like how do we use poems and then combine that with realia. Okay. And then there's a video there, that's an example of a provocation. So these are here for you. Storytelling. This is where I talked about the stones. Yeah, right up here where like you could make them, or actually the coolest thing that came up in that group was you could have the kids make them as their experience, right? That could be the experience of making their own story stones. Anything that you would add here, Tammy, really quickly about administrator look forwarders? What if they're walking in?
Yeah,
you know?
if you're an administrator, you're going into the classroom and you walk in and they're speaking a language that you don't understand, don't leave. No, I'm serious. Don't leave. Stay. Because you're sending an unspoken message if you're only coming in to observe when they're speaking in English. And there's a whole lot you can observe when you can't understand what they're saying, right? So don't underestimate that and stay. In fact, maybe even seek out a time to come in when there's things happening in language you don't understand.
That's actually super important. I've never really thought of that way, because I've always stayed, but that's huge. The other thing I want to point out to that, right, is that we don't need to look at all of it at once. As the administrator, if you're new to watching multilingual learners and what you're looking for, decide like, okay, today I'm going to look at instruction and assessment and really take that in. Tomorrow I'm going to look at interactions and really take that in. Because if you're new to multilingual learners yourself, that's okay. We don't have to be an expert at everything. We just have to be willing to learn along with our teachers.
And you're also modeling what you want them to do with their kids, right? When they're in the
Okay.
classroom. Looking at what they do.
And then I think we talked about videos, but here's your...
I did, yeah, but I think I threw it in here anyway, just to make sure I didn't forget. If you haven't watched them, please do watch them.
These are examples of the home language survey. I think with this one, it's just, Tammy already said it, but every kid gets one.
Yeah, and I think I put it in here too, just in case somebody wanted to know what it looked like and hadn't seen it or something. I think that's maybe was why I put it in here. But yeah, everyone should get it no matter what. It's not, and you want to make sure that your front office staff, if you have front office staff, knows to give a home language survey to everyone, not just who they think needs it, based off of whatever that means, but that it really does go to everybody.
Every child.
Yeah, the first time they enroll. And you would be surprised. I've done a lot of trainings over the years for front office staff who it just literally never occurred to them to give it to everybody.
Because the thing is, if we don't do that step, then everything else we just showed you is
Right.
just there.
Yeah, and then we talk about kids who are dual identified. You can't tell if they're dual identified if you didn't do the one identification, right?
And then Tammy, do they have the Google version, or they?
So what you have is, I downloaded it and put it up in there as a PDF to make sure it preserved what was on the
Perfect.
slide and didn't get weird. So, because.
There's a couple of things I'm going to try to add to your folder and see if I can get them in there, because there's some, okay, so Tammy's going to help me do that. There's some administrator look-fors that I took out of the WIDA essential actions, and I forgot to link it, so I will get that to you.
Yeah, and that's easy. So what you're going to do is you're going to scan that QR code that's in the program and then look for the folder that's for this session. And there's a couple other things we put in there too, something from the comprehensive literacy plan.
We put
And something else
that
I
in
can't
there.
remember.
We
There's
have
a
some
lot of
addi-
stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff in there for you.
Yeah.
I have some additional sentence frames I'll put in there for you. So, we'll give those to you. I think that's it.
Yeah, if
Also-
you don't know, we have tons of
Yes.
free stuff on our website on ECPL. Please come watch our videos. We even have an En Español playlist of all the webinars we've ever done in Spanish. So share that.
It's great. There's so many tools there. If you want to help me out a little bit and scan this QR code, we are actually doing right now trying to figure out what do multilingual learners' experiences look like across the whole state. Nobody's being judged for this. It's anonymous. We just want feedback, and so we're trying really hard. And please share this QR code with anyone and everyone, because we're trying to really get a good idea of what does our state look like for early care and education. And right now, Illinois is kind of leading a lot of conversations about that. And we want to have as much data to share nationwide as we can to say, hey, this is working for us. So it's collaborative. So that's what this is for. Also, don't forget you have tons of free thought partners in our state. StarNet, ECPL, right? The Illinois State Board of Ed, Early Choices, all the things. So we can put early choices up there too. But remember, you have all those thought partners. And most of that professional development is free. I still run into people that don't know that. Like, you can literally call up StarNet and be like, I'd really like a full day workshop on my in-service day, and I'd like it to be on play and language for children with disabilities. And you're not gonna shell out $3,000. We're just gonna come do it.
And bring the stuff.
And bring you stuff, probably presents. So like, I think some people don't realize how much is really there. If you have a teacher that's having trouble implementing strategies with a dual identified child, we can send somebody out to do a TA, which means, I know it sounds scary, technical assistance, all that really means is I'm gonna watch, hang out in the classroom for a little bit, or somebody from the team's gonna watch, hang out in the classroom for a little bit, and then have some conversations with your teacher about what might work. So just don't forget those free resources. I see people all the time, they're like, I just paid $5,000 for this presenter, and my question is, and then what? Right? I'm not saying you have to start it, but then and what? Like, who's gonna do that follow-up? And if it's you, have a thought